My name is George, and in this Bolt EUV video I will be describing the underhood electrical components that make it all work. I'll include the coolant loops also, and I'll be making some observations and recommendations about the Bolt and doing some demos on the Infotainment System and the Driver Information Center. So why did I buy the Bolt? Well, first I was replacing a Ford C-Max hybrid that I had for about 10 years. And it was only used for local travel, and it'll be the same for the Bolt, local travel only. As a matter of fact, I put so few miles on these types of vehicles that for the Bolt, charging from 20% to 80%, I only needed to do that every couple of weeks. As a matter of fact, I'm getting 4.2 miles per kilowatt hour on the Bolt, which equates to a maximum range of about 273 miles, so I'm definitely pleased with that. The other thing is, I'm convinced that electric motors are the proper power source for these types of vehicles, and for most vehicles as a matter of fact, and eventually battery technology will catch up with electric motor technology. So for the Bolt, there's only 13 moving parts in the drive unit. There's a rotor for the motor, there are 4 speed reduction gears on 2 shafts, there's 4 differential gears, and there's 6 ball bearings for a total of 13. Very few compared to an internal combustion engine and its drivetrain. And I've been a car guy for most of my life. In high school, I hot rodded a car, and later on I restored a 1969 Mustang GT from the ground up. It's this one, and my current hobby car is a 1971 Mustang Mach 1. It's this one. And I had an automotive-related career. First with the federal government for many years, and then with an automotive manufacturer trade association. And those jobs took me to automotive manufacturing facilities and engineering facilities in Europe, in the US, and in Japan. So let's move on. Under the hood are 4 major modules. I'm not going to describe how they operate. I don't have the information to do that anyway. But I will identify them and describe their function. And whereas the electric drivetrain is fairly straightforward in concept, it takes a lot of complexity to make it all work. And this is the power distribution module. And its function is to take the high voltage DC power from the under vehicle battery pack and distribute it to the other modules. Below that is the inverter module. You may be able to see the edge of it along here. And its function is to take the high voltage DC power and convert it to 3-phase AC power for powering the electric motor. And this is the accessory power module. And its function is to take the high voltage DC power, step it down to about 14 volts to run vehicle accessories and to charge the 12-volt battery, which is over here. And under that is the onboard charging module. And its function is to take the 120 volt or 240 volt AC power from the charge port on the side of the vehicle and convert it up to a higher voltage DC power that then is sent to the power distribution module and then down to a charge port on the front of the battery. And there's one other module, it's hard to see, it's over here. Its function is to heat the fluid that eventually is used to heat the passenger compartment. It's somewhat difficult to identify the terminals on the various modules and how the cabling connects them through the wiring harness, but I can go through that. This is the terminal and the connector, and there's 2 cables. I think you can only see the top one that connect the high voltage DC power from the under vehicle battery pack to the power distribution module. And this is the terminal and the connector, and you can't see the cables that connect the power distribution module to the inverter module. And then the inverter module sends 3-phase AC power to the electric motor through these 3 cables here. This terminal and connector and cable send power down to a heater that's in front of the battery pack that heats fluid that then heats the battery pack when needed. And this connector and terminal and cable sends power through this cable to the accessory power module, and it also sends power down to the AC compressor through a cable you can't see, and you can't see the compressor, it's next to the electric motor. And then down in here, there's a cable that connects the AC charge port to the onboard charge module, and then an output from the onboard charge module up through this connector and terminal to the power distribution module, and then out through a terminal and connector in this cable down to a charge port that's on the front of the battery pack. And then this terminal and connector and cable sends power to the heater for the fluid that heats the passenger compartment. And this cable is connected directly from the DC fast charge port to the power distribution module, and then directly out to the under vehicle battery pack through this terminal and connector and cables. So it's from the battery pack when you're using power from the battery pack, but when the battery pack is being charged either through DC fast charge or through regenerative braking, it goes out to the battery for recharge purposes through that terminal and connector and cables. I should also mention that there are low voltage connections on each of the module for monitoring and also for command. And also in front of the battery pack, and I can't show a video of that, there are two terminals. One is the high voltage, high current output from the under vehicle battery pack that goes to the power distribution module. And also it's an input when the battery pack is being charged through either DC fast charge or regenerative braking. There's also another port on the front of the battery pack that gets its power from the onboard charging module, which then is high voltage but lower current, and it is used to recharge the battery when the AC power is used to recharge the battery. So these four modules working together are straightforward in concept but elegant in their engineering. Now I want to describe the three coolant circuits that are under the hood. And coolant is a bit of a misnomer because they're not always cooled. They're not always used as a coolant. So I'm going to call this fluid a coolant, even though it's not always used as a coolant. So in particular, this case is the cabin heater circuit. And the coolant goes from that reservoir down to a pump. And from the pump, it comes back to this module, which heats the coolant, which is then sent through a hose to a heater core that's under the dash that's used for heating the passenger compartment. Then it comes back to the reservoir and it starts all over again. Next is the power electronics coolant loop, which starts with this reservoir. Coolant from the reservoir goes down to a pump where the coolant is pumped into a radiator that's back here. And heat and coolant that's already been through the loop gets removed with the help of a thermostatically controlled fan, which is also back here. From there, the coolant goes to the inverter module. From the inverter module, it goes to the accessory power module. From the accessory power module, it goes to the onboard charging module. And from there, it used to go down to the bottom of the drive unit. But I guess Chevrolet decided it didn't need to cool the drive unit. So that part of the loop is not used anymore. So then from the onboard charger module, it goes back to the reservoir and it starts all over again. Next is the under vehicle battery pack heating and cooling loop. It starts with this reservoir. The coolant goes down to a pump where it's first pumped to a heater that's in front of the battery pack. And if the battery pack needs to be heated rather than cooled, then the heater would turn on and heat the coolant, and then it'd be circulated through the battery pack. And when it comes back from the battery pack, it comes through a chiller, which is down here, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then it's returned to the reservoir and the circuit is repeated. In case the battery pack needs to be cooled rather than heated, then the air conditioning compressor would be on, and the chiller, which is really a mini evaporator, would remove heat from the coolant through the evaporation process, and then back to the reservoir, and coolant that's been chilled would then be circulated through the battery pack for cooling the battery pack. The refrigerant that's absorbed the heat from the coolant through the chiller then is returned to the air conditioning compressor and eventually out to the condenser in front of the radiator where the heat is removed. Of course, under all this is the drive unit, which consists of the electric motor, the speed reduction gear set, contained in a cast aluminum housing and connected to the drive unit. On each side are the axle shafts with two constant velocity joints in each one. What I presented of the underhood electrical technology I consider to be a shallow dive. If you're interested in a deep dive, I recommend the videos by Professor John Kelly, and they're available on the Weber State University YouTube channel. And he goes into great detail about the technology. He takes the entire drive unit out of the vehicle, totally disassembles it, shows you all the components, describes their function. He also has a video on the underhood electrical components that I covered, and he hooks up all the cables to them. And he also has another video on the coolant loops. He describes the components, their function, and hooks those up also. He has another video where he drops the battery pack out from under the vehicle, totally disassembles it, and puts it all back together. So if you're interested in a deep dive, those are the videos to watch. I recommend them. And they are the source for some of the information that I presented. Before moving on, I want to pass on some ancient history. I'm sure you've recognized that I'm an ancient person, and also that I've changed my t-shirt. Well, I mentioned that I had hot rodded a car when I was in high school. That was back in the 1950s. It was common for buddies with cars back in the 1950s to form a car club, and this is a car club my friends and I formed. It was also common, if you had a car club, to have a plaque made to display on the back of your car about your car club. And here's a picture of a car with a car club plaque on the back. It's not my car nor my car club. This is a plaque my buddies and I had made. Well, the wording on the t-shirt and the wording on the plaque pretty much says it all. I've been close to a fanatic about cars almost my whole life. Let's move on. Before going inside the bolt, I want to cover one feature on the front, and that's the air curtain vent system. On each side of the vehicle, under the headlight, left side and right side, there's a vent. And here's a picture of one of them. And the purpose of the vent is to direct high pressure air from the front of the vehicle into the wheel well area. And what that does is promotes laminar flow of air along the side of the vehicle as opposed to turbulent air. And turbulent air increases drag. And for an electric vehicle, that would result in a small reduction in range. And for an internal combustion engine vehicle, it would result in a small reduction in fuel economy. One other item. I wanted to get a cover for the cargo area to protect from spills, etc. And I looked online, I looked at what Chevrolet had to offer. Chevrolet's was only black and it was a bit expensive, as were most of the other ones. And most of them had a lip on the edge to protect from spills going over the side. Then I found this one, and it was very inexpensive. It was on Amazon, it was $35. When I got it, I found that it was quite flexible, and you had to cut it. It wasn't custom fit, you had to cut it to fit, but you do have a pattern in the cover for the lower area. And I thought, well, do I really want something that's flexible? But then I decided to get to the lower area, it really is handy to have one that's flexible. You can pull it up and bend it, no problem, and it goes back down. And I think it will work quite well to protect from spills. It doesn't have the lips on the edge, but hopefully I won't spill something that has a lot of volume to it. So I'm sticking with this. Now that I'm inside the bolt, I want to make a few observations. The first has to do with parking on a hill. If you park on a hill and first engage the park shift switch button, which engages the parking pawl in the drive unit, it also automatically applies the electric parking brake. And then when you're ready to drive off and you select either reverse or drive, it automatically releases both and you're ready to go. That's not the case when you park on a level surface, where you would have to manually apply the electric parking brake and manually release it. However, if you forget to do that and you drive off, it will release automatically, but it can't do it instantaneously. So you're putting stress and wear in the system, so that's not something to do regularly. The second observation has to do with the adaptive cruise control, which on the Bolt is based on a video camera. Well, I've had a situation where I'm driving on a sunny road surface, and I come upon a dark road surface with trees lining both sides of the road and casting their shadows on the road. And apparently the system sees that as a hazard and starts to slow the vehicle aggressively. Well, that's not a good situation, because if there's no traffic in front of the Bolt and there's a vehicle behind, and all of a sudden the Bolt starts to slow aggressively, that's not a good situation. I have another vehicle where the adaptive cruise control is based on radar, and I've not had a problem with that. Of course, the radar is not going to be affected by going from a light road surface to a dark road surface. But there's other situations where the Bolt seems to identify a hazard where there isn't one, and the system on my other vehicle with radar, either through the radar beam width or algorithms in the firmware, does not identify that as a hazard. The final item has to do with a insert I found on Amazon. It's an insert for the console between the seats. And by the way, there's quite a few accessories on Amazon. Anyway, this insert, and here's a picture of it. It's about 1 inch deep and allows you to store sunglasses and other items and not have to reach down into the console and fumble around trying to find something. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the infotainment system. And this is really directed at people new to the Bolt. I think if you've had a Bolt for some time, you figured out everything about the infotainment system. And the owner's manual doesn't really cover a lot about the Bolt, especially the settings part of it. You have to figure that out pretty much on your own. So this is just like a tablet. Of course, you can scroll between the pages. On the last page, I've parked 4 apps I never use. I'd like to delete them, but you can't do that. For example, if I try to delete SiriusXM and drag it to the trash can, it says it cannot be deleted. And I think that's probably the same for most of the apps, maybe all of them installed by General Motors. I haven't tested them all, but I suspect that's the case. And the first thing I recommend you do, new to the Bolt, is to go through all these apps and see what they do and how you control the functions that they cover. For example, under Energy, you can see how you've done history. You can look at impacts. For example, here I've gained some mileage on technique, lost it on terrain and climate, and gained some on outside temperature. And this shows you how much is left of a battery charge. And then for charging, this is something that you set up. You can set the level that you want the battery to be charged to. I've got it set up for a little over 200 miles, and I'm using 240 volt AC charging, and I have it ready every day at 6:30 a.m. However, since I drive the Bolt so few miles, when I want to charge it from 20% up to 80%, I only have to do that every couple of weeks. So going back to home, and by the way, like for climate, for example, you can control the climate system through the infotainment system. I prefer to use the physical buttons and switches that are located below the infotainment screen. I find that much easier to use than to try to control it using the infotainment system. Same with audio. So anyway, probably the most important is settings. And under settings, you can do settings for the system, for apps, and for the vehicle. And I recommend you go through each one of these topics and see what they cover and see how you make choices or make changes. For example, under language, you can have any language you want of the 3. And if you go to apps, under climate, you can have cooled seats or auto heated seats, etc. So I recommend you go through all of those. And when you do that, you can configure the Bolt to your preferences. Well, I didn't do that. I kind of jumped in. The first thing I did was to save a number of AM and FM radio stations. And I think you can do that also with SiriusXM channels. I don't use Sirius XM. As a matter of fact, I rarely listen to the AM and FM stations I've saved, maybe just for news or sports. And by the way, you can never turn off the audio system completely unless you turn the infotainment system off completely. And that is indicated up here in the upper left-hand corner. You can see that music files are listed up there that are being played. Well, they're on a USB memory stick, and I've got more than 2,000 music files on the memory stick. And I've stripped those off LP record albums, off of CDs, and I've paid for and downloaded some files off the internet. So anyway, under settings, like I say, I recommend you go through each one of these, see what they do, and see how you make selections or make changes. For example, under system, if you went to language, I've already said this, you can select the language that you want. So when I saved into memory the radio stations, I wanted to reorder how I had them saved, so I could go from the lowest frequency to the highest frequency. So under systems, you can do that under favorites, manage favorites, and there's all the stations that I've saved. And to reorder them, you just touch and hold, and then you can drag them to wherever you want to. And if you touch the pencil icon, you can either describe the call letters for the station or something about the format if you want to. Turns out this also shows up under apps. If you go to apps and audio, and under audio, manage favorites, there they are again. Not sure why they're in two places, but they are. So another thing I wanted to do was to change the volume that the audio system goes to as speed increases. So under apps, you can do audio, and then you can do auto volume. And I've selected medium. So it says auto volume, adjust your radio volume based on vehicle speed. Select the relative volume level you prefer. And another thing that I wanted to do was to have all windows go down completely when I press and hold the unlock button on the remote. So you do that under vehicle, and you go to remote lock, unlock at start, and then you do remote window operation, and I have that on. It says remote window operation allows you to control your windows with your remote key. See owner's manual for details. So that's handy if your car's been sitting in the sun and you want it to cool off a little bit or release some of the hot air from inside the vehicle before you get in. As you approach, you can push and hold the unlock button on the remote, and it does put all 4 windows down. In case if you haven't noticed that the rear windows are expressed down but not expressed up. And one final thing I wanted to do, which is kind of neat, I wanted to be able to have the lights flash on the vehicle if I'm in a parking lot or parking garage and I can't exactly remember where the car is. It'd be nice if the lights would flash. So under vehicle, if you choose lighting, you can do vehicle locator lights, and you can turn them on. It says vehicle locator lights briefly turns on the exterior lights when you press the unlock button on the remote keyless transmitter. So those are a couple of demonstrations of things you can do under settings. And later I went through everything and made the selections I wanted, the changes I wanted to the settings to configure the bolt to my preferences. And I recommend you do the same. So that's a little discussion of the infotainment system. I'd now like to demonstrate the operation of the driver information center and how you can make changes to the display. And to do that, I've got to move a camera. I want to talk a little bit about the driver information center. And this display is the modern display, which I prefer over the enhanced display, which has more information than I need or want. And the modern display has pretty much just the right amount. So you can make a lot of changes to the display. On the right side of the steering wheel, there's a couple of switches. If you push the left-hand switch, you get the options that you can set up. So under information, if you push the thumb wheel to select it and then use the thumb wheel to scroll through the options, you can have a trip odometer, you can have average speed, you can have tire pressure, you can have a timer, you can have the distance to warning to the vehicle in front of you, and you can have nothing. And pushing the left-hand switch again, under the music topic, you can see that it shows that I have selected my memory stick with my more than 2,000 music files, and nothing's playing right now. Pushing that left-hand button again, under direction. I don't have navigation, but I guess you had navigation. You get some information on turn by turn. Right now, the GPS system is showing that I'm facing east. Pushing the left-hand button again, going down to phone. You can see my phone is connected, but there's no active call. Pushing the left-hand button again, going down to the next selection. That's where you move between enhanced and modern. And of course, I prefer modern. Pushing the left-hand button again and skipping over that, going down to settings and selecting settings. You can select units. You can have the speed warning, which I have off. There's a tutorial. There's information on open source software, and back to units. So pushing that left-hand button again, going back to information with the thumb wheel, and selecting that, there's nothing, no additional information, which is what I prefer. So that's a little tutorial on the Driver Information Center and how to set up the options. As an epilogue, I wanted to mention a few things. First, this is a Bolt EUV Premier. The only option I ordered was the extra cost red color. I did not order the Super Cruise because I would rarely take this on a road I could use Super Cruise on anyway, and I'm not interested in paying a premium when the free period is over. I also did not order the sunroof option. My other vehicle has a sunroof. I rarely have it open. I'm not interested in the sun beating down on me. And as far as the Bose sound system goes, these old ears wouldn't tell the difference between the Bose system and a standard system. And with regard to navigation, I can always use Android Auto. I ordered this Bolt in early January of 2023, and I paid MSRP for it. I took delivery in mid-April. Well, since that time, I've been looking online at local dealers to see their in-stock inventory. And believe it or not, some dealers are advertising their bolts for $10,000 over MSRP. I would not be interested in buying a bolt at $10,000 over MSRP, and maybe not anything over MSRP. So anyway, I hope that there's something here that you found of interest. I think most of the coverage of the infotainment system and the Driver Information Center was for new owners of bolts. I think people have had their bolts for some time, have already figured everything out. So anyway, I want to thank you for watching this video.